The enemy squadron leader's voice cut through the radio with contempt. "One transport aircraft with no weapons. This ends now." Then Lieutenant Maya Chen smiled and spoke words that would haunt the survivors. "You brought 9 jets. You should have brought 20. Lieutenant Maya Warden Chen, 31 years old, gripped the yoke of her C-130J Super Hercules as it lumbered through Philippine airspace at 12,000 feet. Her black hair was pulled into a tight regulation bun, dark eyes scanning instruments with the calm precision of someone who had logged for 200 flight hours. To everyone at Clark Air Base, she was just another cargo pilot hauling supplies across the Pacific Theater. What they didn't know was that Maya had flown something entirely different before: the transport aircraft, F-15E Strike Eagles with the 306th Fighter Wing, where she had been one of the Air Force's most lethal air-to-air tacticians. The morning sun painted the South China Sea gold as Maya's cargo bird carried medical supplies and communication equipment toward a forward operating base on Palawan Island. Her co-pilot, fresh-faced Lieutenant Harris, was reviewing approach procedures when the radar warning receiver suddenly screamed to life. Maya's eyes snapped to the threat display showing 9 hostile contacts accelerating toward their position from the northwest. Chinese J-11 fighters, the flanker variants designed specifically for air superiority. Harris's voice cracked with panic as he read the tactical display showing their impossible situation, surrounded and defenseless. 6 years ago, Maya had been the Air Force's rising star in air-to-air combat, accumulating an unofficial tally of enemy aircraft destroyed during classified missions that would never appear in official records. Her younger brother, Captain David Chen, had been a pararescue jumper who died saving 3 Marines from a downed helicopter in Afghanistan. His death had shattered something in Maya, making her question whether killing from 30,000 feet truly honored his sacrifice. She had voluntarily transferred to Air Mobility Command, trading her fighter cockpit for the lumbering transports that saved lives instead of taking them. But she carried David's pararescue badge in her flight suit pocket always, a reminder of why she'd chosen a new path. The C-130J Super Hercules was never designed for combat against fighter aircraft. It was a 4-engine turboprop transport with a maximum speed barely reaching 410 mph compared to the J-11's supersonic capabilities exceeding 1,500 pounds. It carried no missiles, no cannons, nothing but electronic warfare pods and chaff dispensers intended for evading surface threats. The aircraft's strength was its cargo capacity and short-field performance, advantages that meant absolutely nothing when 9 enemy fighters were converging with the singular purpose of forcing her down or blowing her from the sky. Maya's tactical display showed the enemy formation splitting into 3 elements, a classic bracket maneuver designed to eliminate any escape route for their lumbering target. Harris's hands trembled on his control panel as he keyed the emergency frequency, his voice high and tight with fear. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. Cargo 7-2 under attack by hostile fighters requesting immediate assistance." The response from command came back hollow with reality. Nearest friendly air support was 18 minutes out, an eternity when supersonic jets were already closing to weapons range. The lead J-11 pilot's voice came through on guard frequency, speaking English with cold precision. "American transport, you have violated restricted airspace. Reduce speed and descend to 2,000 feet or you will be destroyed." Maya's jaw tightened as she calculated vectors and angles that shouldn't have mattered in a cargo aircraft. Colonel Marcus Webb sat in the operations center at Clark Air Base, watching the unfolding situation on the tactical display with growing dread. He had never thought much of Maya Chen beyond her punctual delivery schedules and flawless safety record. She was competent but unremarkable, just another transport pilot flying predictable routes. Her personnel file sat on his desk, and he had never bothered to read beyond the first page showing her current assignment. Now he watched 9 enemy fighters converging on her aircraft and felt the familiar weight of command decisions. Order her to comply and risk international incident, or tell her to run and watch her get shot down. Neither option would save her life or the critical cargo she carried. Maya's voice came through the radio, calm as winter ice, addressing not the command center, but the enemy flight leader directly. "Hostile lead. This is Lieutenant Maya Chen, United States Air Force. I'm carrying medical supplies for humanitarian relief operations. You are threatening unarmed personnel in international airspace." The J-11 pilot laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "International airspace. We own these skies, cargo pilot. You have 30 seconds to comply before I demonstrate exactly how defenseless you are." 3 of the enemy fighters dropped lower, positioning themselves for gun runs. Harris looked at Maya with desperate eyes, waiting for her to acknowledge the inevitable and begin their descent into captivity or death. Maya's left hand moved to the throttle controls, while her right stayed steady on the yoke, her mind shifting into a combat calculus she had sworn to leave behind. The C-130J might be slow and unarmed, but it possessed capabilities these J-11 pilots wouldn't anticipate. Extreme low-speed handling, near-instant power response from the Rolls-Royce turboprops, and a tactical radius these fighters had already committed beyond by pursuing this deep into contested space. She thought of David, of his para-rescue motto, that others may live. 6 years ago she had stopped killing to honor that creed. Now 9 enemy fighters threatened not just her life but Harris's and the Marines waiting for those medical supplies on Palawan. Sometimes saving lives required impossible choices. The lead J-11 fired a warning burst from its 30mm cannon, tracers slashing through the air 500 feet ahead of Maya's cockpit, a final ultimatum written in phosphorescent death. Harris flinched hard, his hand moving toward the altitude control to begin their forced descent. Maya's hand shot out and caught his wrist with surprising strength, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Lieutenant Harris, I need you to trust me for the next 7 minutes. Secure all cargo, then strap in tight and don't touch any controls." Her voice carried something Harris had never heard before. Not fear, not resignation, but the cold certainty of a predator who had just decided to stop pretending to be prey. Harris stared at Maya as if seeing her for the first time, something in her expression triggering a primal recognition that the woman beside him was not who he had assumed. He scrambled toward the cargo bay, his training overriding his confusion. Maya's fingers danced across the electronic warfare panel, activating systems that Harris didn't even know the C-130J possessed. Classified modifications that turned the lumbering transport into a flying sensor platform capable of tracking and jamming enemy communications. The J-11 formation tightened, 3 fighters breaking left, 3 right, 3 holding high cover. They were executing a textbook intercept pattern against a target they believed was helpless. Maya keyed her radio with a smile that would have terrified them. "Hostile lead, I decline your offer." The enemy flight leader's response was immediate and lethal. 2 J-11s rolled in from opposite sides, their targeting radars painting Maya's aircraft with the electronic signature of imminent death. But Maya had already begun her move, something no cargo pilot should attempt and few fighter pilots would dare. She chopped the left outboard engine to idle while simultaneously firewalling the right outboard throttle, inducing a violent flat spin entry that sent the C-130J pivoting on its axis like a compass needle. The maneuver was aerodynamically obscene, violating every principle of transport aircraft operation. The attacking J-11s flashed past on either side, their targeting solutions dissolving as their intended victim disappeared from where physics said it should be. Colonel Webb lurched forward in his command chair, coffee spraying across his console as Maya's aircraft symbol performed maneuvers that should have resulted in an immediate structural failure. "What the hell is she doing?" he shouted at his air operations officer, who could only shake his head in disbelief. The technical specifications for the C-130J explicitly prohibited aerobatic maneuvering. The aircraft was built for cargo operations, not combat. Yet, on the God's Eye tactical display, Maya's transport was dancing through 3-dimensional space like a wounded animal that had suddenly revealed fangs. The enemy fighters scattered in confusion, their formation discipline breaking as they tried to reorient on a target behaving in ways their training had never anticipated. Webb's hand reached for Maya's personnel file with dawning horror. Maya leveled the aircraft momentarily, all 4 engines screaming as she converted altitude for airspeed, pushing the C-130J toward its structural limits. The enemy pilots were regrouping, their initial surprise giving way to anger and professional pride. 9 fighters against 1 transport was supposed to be a turkey shoot. Not whatever this was becoming. The tactical display showed them reforming into a more cautious approach pattern, coming in from different altitudes with better spacing. Harris pulled himself back into the cockpit, his face pale, strapping into his seat with shaking hands. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what the actual hell are you?" Maya's eyes tracked the enemy fighters with predatory focus. "I'm someone who made a mistake 6 years ago, thinking I could outrun what I am." The next J-11 attack came from above, a diving gun run with the fighter pilot keeping his speed high to avoid whatever insanity the transport pilot might attempt. Maya saw him coming, calculated his vector and closure rate with the instant geometry of air combat that lived in her muscle memory. She rolled the C-130J inverted, an action so fundamentally wrong for a cargo aircraft that Harris started praying, then pulled the nose through the horizon in a split S maneuver that dropped them 3,000 feet in seconds. The J-11 pilot tried to follow, but his energy state was all wrong for vertical maneuvering at that speed. He overshot high, cursing in Mandarin on the guard frequency as his careful attack dissolved into wasted fuel and ammunition. 2 more J-11s came in from the flanks, trying to catch Maya in a pincer as she rolled upright and yanked the transport through a gut-wrenching chandelle that bled off speed while changing direction. The enemy pilots expected momentum and inertia to limit her options. Fighters relied on speed and energy, cargo planes even more so. But Maya was exploiting the one advantage her ungainly aircraft possessed. The C-130J could fly at 110 knots without stalling, slower than a Cessna trainer, while the J-11s needed 140 knots minimum to stay airborne. She chopped power and pulled nose high, the turboprops clawing at thin air as her airspeed dropped into a regime where the enemy fighters simply could not follow without falling from the sky. The tactical radio exploded with angry Mandarin as the 2 attacking J-11s blew past on either side, their airspeed too high to match Maya's suddenly glacial velocity. One pilot tried to throttle back and nearly departed controlled flight, his aircraft shuddering on the edge of a stall as he fought to recover. Maya slammed the throttles forward and dropped the nose, trading the altitude she'd gained for kinetic energy in a power dive that sent the C-130J plummeting earthward at an angle that made Harris grip his seat until his knuckles turned white. She leveled at 4,000 feet, racing toward a building line of cumulus clouds that rose like white towers from the ocean surface. The enemy flight leader's voice had lost its contemptuous edge. "All units, this pilot is combat trained, adjust tactics accordingly." Colonel Webb finally opened Maya's complete personnel file, his face draining of color as he read past the Air Mobility Command assignment to the redacted sections beneath. Fighter Weapons School Graduate 2014, Air-to-Air Tactics Instructor, Nellis AFB. Classified deployment, red flag exercises. Jesus Christ, she's an aggressor pilot. His operations officer leaned over his shoulder, reading the commendations that someone had buried under administrative transfers. "Sir, it says here she had an unofficial kill ratio that made her one of the top 5 threat simulators in the program. She spent 3 years teaching our best pilots how to fight against impossible odds." Webb's hand trembled as he keyed the emergency frequency. "Cargo 7-2, be advised you are cleared to engage defensive maneuvers at pilot discretion." Maya drove her aircraft into the clouds, the world outside disappearing into gray nothing as water vapor streaked across the windscreen. The J-11 pilots had radar and infrared tracking, but Maya had something more valuable, an intimate understanding of how fighter pilots thought, what they expected, how they hunted. She knew they would split their formation, some holding outside the clouds to catch her when she emerged, others penetrating the weather to maintain contact. She yanked the C-130J through a hard right turn inside the concealment, then reversed left, then chopped power to nearly nothing, hanging the massive aircraft on its propellers in a maneuver that would have her instructors screaming. 2 J-11s blasted through the clouds where she should have been, their radars momentarily confused by the return scatter. Harris watched the tactical display show 3 enemy fighters circling above the clouds, while 6 prowled through the weather trying to flush their prey. Maya's breathing was perfectly controlled, her hands steady on controls as she flew purely on instruments through the churning gray. 1 J-11 passed less than 500 feet away, visible for just a moment as a dark shadow in the mist. Maya didn't evade. She turned toward it, closing the distance before the enemy pilot could react. The Chinese pilot saw the massive cargo plane materializing from the clouds directly ahead and panicked, yanking his stick hard right. His wingman, flying close formation, had 1 second to register the disaster before their aircraft collided in a fireball that lit the clouds from within like a hellish lantern. The explosion's shockwave rocked Maya's aircraft, instruments flickering as burning debris tumbled past her wings toward the ocean below. Harris stared in disbelief at the tactical display showing 2 enemy contacts winking out of existence. Maya's voice was cold and clinical as she reported, "Command, Cargo 7-2, 2 hostile aircraft destroyed by mutual collision induced through defensive maneuvering, 7 bandits remaining." The enemy flight leader's voice came through the radio, no longer arrogant but sharp with fury and something else, the first edge of fear. She killed Fing and Liu. How did a cargo plane kill them? Maya emerged from the clouds at high speed, leveling at wave-top height where the ocean's radar return would clutter the enemy sensors with false contacts and interference. The 4 J-11s that had been prowling through the clouds broke into open air, reforming with the 3 holding high cover. 7 fighters remained, their fuel states declining as they burned through reserves chasing a target that refused to die predictably. Maya checked her own fuel. She had maybe 20 minutes of hard maneuvering left before she would have to brake for Palawan or ditch in the ocean. The enemy had numbers and speed. She had knowledge and the willingness to push her aircraft beyond any sane operational limits. The J-11 flight leader called new instructions to his remaining pilots, pulling them into a disciplined trail formation for sequential gun runs that would deny her the spatial chaos she had been exploiting. Maya saw the tactical shift and smiled grimly. They were learning, adapting. Good, that made them predictable. 3 J-11s dove toward her position, while 4 climbed to high cover, ready to pounce if she tried to gain altitude. Maya stayed low, her propellers churning salt spray from the wave tops as she thundered across the South China Sea at 280 knots. The attacking fighters came in line astern, each pilot waiting for the one ahead to finish their gun run before committing. Textbook tactics that eliminated mutual interference and fratricide risk. The lead J-11 opened fire at 1,200 meters, 30mm cannon shells walking toward Maya's aircraft in a stream of tracer fire. Maya waited until the last possible instant, then deployed full flaps and chopped all 4 throttles simultaneously. The C-130J's massive wing area acted like an air brake, bleeding 50 knots in 3 seconds, physics that no fighter could match. The attacking J-11 flashed overhead so close that Harris could see the pilot's helmet in the cockpit. The enemy fighter doing 450 knots with no way to slow down or turn tight enough at wave-top altitude. The Chinese pilot's choices were simple and terrible. Pull up and lose his firing solution, or maintain altitude and risk flying into the ocean during maneuvering. He chose to pull up, afterburners igniting as he clawed for sky. Maya had already firewalled her throttles, flaps retracting as the turboprops screamed back to full power. The second J-11 in the trail was committed to his run, his firing solution degraded but still viable. He triggered his cannon, but Maya had already snap-rolled 90 degrees, presenting her narrow wing profile instead of the fuselage's broad target area. Shells screamed past, stitching the ocean with white geysers. Colonel Webb stood transfixed before the tactical display, watching a masterclass in defensive maneuvering that would be analyzed in fighter weapons schools for decades if anyone ever believed it had actually happened. His operations officer was recording every second, the data feeds showing maneuvers that violated the C-130J's flight manual on every page. "Sir, she's flying that transport like it's an A-10 Warthog," the major whispered, referencing the only other aircraft in the inventory that could survive through sheer bloody-minded agility rather than speed. Webb shook his head slowly. "No, she's flying it like someone who knows exactly how fighter pilots think, because she used to be the one teaching them how to kill." The third J-11 in the attack sequence rolled in, and this pilot was learning from his wingmen's mistakes, coming in slower with a better angle. The third J-11 pilot had adjusted his approach speed and angle, coming in at 320 knots with better energy management for a sustained gun tracking solution. Maya saw him lining up, calculated the geometry, and knew her previous tricks wouldn't work against this one. He was too smart, too patient. She yanked the C-130J into a hard banking turn toward the fighter, pointing her nose directly at his aircraft in a game of chicken that made Harris close his eyes and pray. The enemy pilot's nerve broke first. He pulled up sharply to avoid collision, his cannon shells going high and wild. But Maya wasn't finished with him. As he passed overhead, she deployed chaff and activated her electronic warfare suite, jamming his threat warning systems with a storm of false signals that made his cockpit scream with phantom missile locks. The panicked J-11 pilot broke hard left, his training taking over as the threat warnings convinced him that the unarmed cargo plane had somehow fired missiles at him. He dumped flares and chaff while diving for the deck, his situational awareness degraded by the electronic assault. Maya had already rolled out, heading northwest, directly toward the 4 fighters, holding high cover at 15,000 feet. Harris found his voice. "Ma'am, you're flying toward them." Maya's response was clipped and certain. "They're expecting me to run away." Fighter pilots hate targets that close distance instead of fleeing. It breaks their decision cycle, makes them hesitate. She pushed the throttles through maximum continuous power into the emergency war power setting, the turboprops screaming as they propelled the transport into a steep climbing turn that would drain precious fuel but gain the altitude advantage for what came next. The four high-cover J-11s scattered as the C-130J clawed upward toward their position, their formation dissolving as each pilot made independent decisions about engaging a target, exhibiting behavior that violated everything they understood about cargo aircraft. The enemy flight leader tried to restore order, barking commands in Mandarin, but Maya had already achieved her objective. She had transformed a coordinated fighting unit into four individual pilots, each trying to solve different tactical problems. One J-11 dove toward her nose, another rolled in from the beam, two more maneuvered for tail position. Maya reached the apex of her climb at 13,000 feet, her aircraft hanging on the edge of stall, and made a choice that would either save them or kill them instantly. She rolled inverted and pulled through into a split S dive, trading all her altitude for airspeed in one violent commitment. The C-130J plummeted earthward inverted, Harris screaming as loose equipment that hadn't been properly secured rained against the ceiling. Maya held the inverted dive for 4 endless seconds, watching her airspeed indicator climb toward red line, then rolled upright and pulled back on the yoke with both hands, the G-forces crushing her into her seat as the aircraft's frame groaned in protest. The J-11 that had been diving toward her nose tried to follow the maneuver, but his speed was too high. He pulled too hard, overstressed his airframe, and one wing folded upward with a sound like tearing metal. The fighter tumbled out of control, its pilot ejecting in a bloom of orange parachute silk. 3 kills, 6 fighters remaining. Maya leveled at 8,000 feet, breathing hard, knowing her aircraft had just absorbed structural stress that would require weeks of inspection and repair. The enemy flight leader's voice cut through the radio traffic, speaking directly to Maya with cold respect that acknowledged a fellow warrior. "American pilot, you are skilled, but you cannot run forever. My remaining aircraft have enough fuel for 12 more minutes of engagement. You have killed 3 of my pilots. Surrender now, and I guarantee your safety as prisoners of war." Maya glanced at her fuel gauge. 8 minutes of combat maneuvering remaining, maybe 12 if she went to minimum power. The math was brutal and simple. She couldn't outlast them, couldn't outrun them, couldn't keep dodging forever. Harris looked at her with exhausted hope, clearly wanting her to accept the offer. Maya thought of David's para-rescue badge in her pocket, thought of the Marines waiting for medical supplies on Palawan, and keyed her microphone. "Negative hostile lead. You came here to force down 1 cargo plane. Let's see if your 6 fighters can actually do it." The 6 remaining J-11s formed into 2 3-ship elements, 1 high and 1 low, boxing Maya into a vertical corridor with no room for the wild aerobatics that had kept her alive. The enemy flight leader was done making mistakes. He was burning fuel to execute a methodical professional kill that would end with Maya either surrendering or dying. Colonel Webb watched the tactical picture with sick certainty, knowing he was about to witness a brilliant pilot get overwhelmed by simple mathematics. Then his radar operator called out something impossible. "Sir, I'm picking up 4 new contacts bearing 090, Angels 20, speed 600 knots. They're squawking friendly." Webb's heart surged as he recognized the transponder codes. F-15 Eagles from the 67th Fighter Squadron, Kadena Air Base, still 11 minutes out but coming in hot with full afterburner. Maya saw the new contacts appear on her tactical display and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for the past 18 minutes. Hope. But 11 minutes was an eternity when 6 enemy fighters were collapsing their net around her position. The low element of 3 J-11s came in from different angles, forcing her to choose which threat to address while leaving herself exposed to the others. Maya chose aggression over defense, turning hard into the nearest fighter and lighting him up with her targeting radar. The C-130J had no weapons, but the enemy pilot didn't know that. His threat warning receiver screamed missile lock, and years of training made him break defensive, dumping countermeasures against a threat that didn't exist. 2 seconds of confusion, but it was enough. Maya slipped past his wingman and drove toward the coast, every engine screaming. The enemy flight leader saw what Maya was attempting, a straight run for Palawan, betting everything that she could survive 11 more minutes until American fighters arrived. He made the hard call, ordering his 6 aircraft to abandon fuel conservation and commit to maximum pursuit. The J-11s surged forward on full afterburner, closing the distance with brutal speed. Maya watched them come, knew her lumbering transport couldn't outrun supersonic fighters, and accepted the geometry of her death. Then Harris spoke up, his voice steadier than it had been. Ma'am, we're at max gross weight with those medical supplies, 20,000 pounds of cargo. If we were lighter, we'd be faster and more maneuverable. Maya turned to look at him, understanding the implication. The supplies were desperately needed, but they were also dead weight in a fight for survival. Maya's hand hesitated over the cargo door controls, the decision freezing her for 3 precious seconds. Those medical supplies would save marine lives on Palawan: blood, plasma, antibiotics, surgical equipment that couldn't be replaced for weeks. But they also meant Harris would die in the next 5 minutes when the J-11s finally got their kill. She thought of David again, of the impossible choice he had made on that mountain in Afghanistan: risk his life for a chance to save others. Knowing the odds were against survival, he had chosen service over safety and died, proving that some things mattered more than mathematics. Maya's jaw set with decision. She kept her hand away from the cargo release, adjusted her grip on the yoke, and pushed her dying aircraft harder. "We keep the cargo, Lieutenant. Those Marines need it more than we need the performance edge." The lead J-11 achieved missile lock, his targeting radar painting Maya's aircraft with the electronic signature of imminent death. He selected an infrared-guided PL-5 missile and triggered launch, but hesitated at the last instant, his finger frozen on the trigger. The American fighters were 9 minutes out, close enough that their powerful radars were now tracking the engagement. If he killed this cargo plane, he would start an international incident that could escalate into full combat between American and Chinese forces. His orders had been to force the aircraft down, not to create a casus belli. He keyed his radio to Maya. "American pilot, I am authorized to fire. This is your final warning. Descend to 2,000 feet and reduce speed, or I will send you into the ocean." Maya checked her fuel. 6 minutes of maneuvering remained. The American Eagles were 9 minutes out. The math still didn't work. Maya's mind raced through the tactical equation, knowing the enemy flight leader was caught between his mission orders and the political implications of killing an American crew. She keyed her microphone with a voice that carried absolute conviction. "Hostile lead. If you fire that missile, those 4 F-15s will engage your formation before you can return to your carrier. You'll lose 6 aircraft and 12 pilots to kill 1 cargo plane. Your commanders will ask why you started a shooting war over medical supplies." The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10, 15. The J-11 pilot's tone shifted, professional respect mixing with barely contained frustration. "You are correct, but I also cannot allow you to complete your mission. We are at impasse." Maya saw the opening in his words, the tactical compromise that might save everyone. "Then escort us. Stay on my wing until the Eagles arrive, then withdraw. You complete your intercept, I complete my delivery, nobody dies today." The enemy flight leader considered the proposal while his 6 fighters held formation around Maya's battered transport, their weapons armed but not firing. Colonel Webb listened to the exchange with held breath, recognizing the delicate negotiation happening at 250 knots and 8,000 feet. The Chinese pilot's voice returned, measured and careful. "I will relay your proposal to my commanders." 2 minutes passed in tense silence, Maya flying straight and level while enemy fighters paced her on all sides like wolves around wounded prey. Then the radio crackled. "Proposal accepted. My aircraft will maintain escort position until American fighters arrive at 5-kilometer separation. Then we withdraw to international airspace." "But American pilot, you have earned something today." Maya's response was wary. "What's that, hostile lead?" The enemy pilot's tone carried a warrior's acknowledgement. "My respect. You fly like the legends our instructors told us could not exist." "What is your name?" Maya hesitated, knowing that giving her name would connect her current actions to her past identity, the classified file that Colonel Webb was probably reading right now. But this enemy pilot had chosen honor over orders, restraint over easy victory, and the deserved reciprocal honesty. "Captain Maya Torres, formerly of the 64th Aggressor Squadron, currently assigned to Air Mobility Command." The silence that followed was profound. Then the Chinese pilot's voice returned with something like awe. "Torres! The Red Wolf of Nellis? We studied your tactics in our fighter school. They told us you were training mythology, that no pilot could actually fly the way the reports described." Maya watched the F-15s closing on her tactical display, now 6 minutes out. "Tell your instructors the reports were accurate, and tell them the Red Wolf says they trained you well. Your formation discipline is exceptional." The 6 J-11s settled into loose escort formation, maintaining weapons hold while matching Maya's course and speed toward Palawan. It was a bizarre tableau. Enemy fighters protecting the aircraft they had been trying to destroy, professionalism and mutual respect temporarily overriding the political tensions that had brought them to combat. Harris sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation that his pilot was apparently a legendary fighter tactics instructor who had somehow ended up flying cargo planes. Colonel Webb's voice came through on the command frequency, tight with controlled emotion. Cargo 7-2. Be advised the Eagles have visual contact with your formation. The hostile aircraft are breaking away as agreed. Maya watched the J-11s peel off in pairs, their flight leader waggling his wings in the traditional salute between warriors before turning east toward the carrier battle group that had launched them. The 4 F-15s thundered past in afterburner, their pilots executing a victory roll that shook the sky. Maya's hands finally began to tremble on the controls as the adrenaline drained from her system, leaving behind exhaustion and the sick realization of how close they had come to dying. The C-130J's engines coughed, fuel running low enough that the pumps were drawing vapor. She adjusted course for Palawan, the Philippine coastline emerging from the haze like salvation. Harris found his voice rough with emotion. Ma'am, why were you flying cargo? Someone with your skills should be leading fighter squadrons, not hauling boxes. Maya's eyes remained fixed forward, her jaw tight with old pain. 6 years ago, I made a choice in a training exercise, pushed my student too hard trying to prove I was still the best. He ejected safely, but I ended his career. The Air Force gave me a choice: accept transfer to AMC or face a board of inquiry. I chose to disappear rather than fight. She glanced at David's badge. Until today, I thought running was the right decision. The C-130J touched down at Palawan Air Base with less than 3 minutes of fuel remaining, the landing gear kissing the runway with a gentleness that belied the violence of the previous 30 minutes. Emergency vehicles lined the taxiway, their crews expecting to find a shot-up aircraft barely holding together. Instead, they found a transport with stress cracks in the wing spars and hydraulic fluid leaking from overtaxed systems, but structurally intact, a testament to Lockheed's engineering and one pilot's refusal to accept the limits others assumed. Maya shut down the engines and sat motionless in her seat, her body shaking with delayed shock. Medical personnel swarmed the cargo hold, transferring the desperately needed supplies to waiting ambulances. A Marine colonel appeared at her cockpit window, his weathered face showing profound gratitude. Captain, those supplies will save 18 of my Marines who wouldn't have made it otherwise. Whatever you did to get them here, thank you. Maya climbed down from the cockpit, on legs that barely supported her weight, Harris close behind her, still processing everything he had witnessed. A black SUV waited on the tarmac, and Colonel Webb emerged from the passenger seat with her complete personnel file in his hands. His expression was unreadable as he approached, and Maya instinctively straightened to attention despite her exhaustion. Webb studied her for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He saluted her with the crisp precision reserved for warriors who had earned respect through blood and skill. Captain Torres, I owe you an apology. I dismissed you as a has-been cargo pilot when you're actually one of the finest combat aviators I've ever had the privilege to observe. Maya returned the salute, her voice hoarse. Sir, I was just doing my job, trying to complete the mission. Webb shook his head slowly, holding up a tablet displaying the recorded tactical data from her engagement. Captain, what you did up there isn't just doing your job. It's a textbook case study that will be taught at every fighter weapons school in the free world. You survived against 9 enemy fighters in an unarmed cargo plane through sheer skill and tactical brilliance. 3 enemy aircraft destroyed, 6 more fought to a standstill, and you delivered your cargo without losing a single crew member. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The Air Force made a mistake 6 years ago, burying a pilot of your caliber in cargo operations. I'm authorized to tell you that Admiral Richardson, commander of Pacific Fleet, is personally recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. But more importantly, I'm here to offer you a choice. Return to AMC and finish your career in obscurity, or come back to where you belong. Maya looked down at David's pararescue badge still clutched in her hand, the metal warm from her grip during the entire engagement. 6 years she had been running from her mistake, hiding in cargo planes, and convincing herself that service without glory was enough. But David had taught her something essential. Redemption wasn't found in hiding from your failures. It was found in standing up when others needed you most, regardless of the cost. She met Webb's eyes with renewed clarity. Sir, I spent 6 years believing I didn't deserve to be a fighter pilot anymore. Today I remembered that it's not about deserving anything, it's about being capable when others depend on you. If the Air Force is willing to give me a second chance, I won't waste it. Webb smiled for the first time since they had met. Welcome back to the fight, Captain. The 64th Aggressor Squadron has an opening for an instructor pilot. They specifically requested the Red Wolf. 3 months later, Maya stood in front of a classroom of fighter pilots at Nellis Air Force Base, her flight suit now adorned with the medal ribbon for Distinguished Flying Cross alongside her existing decorations. The students watched her with the mixture of skepticism and curiosity that all new instructors faced until she displayed the tactical recording from the South China Sea engagement. For the next hour, she walked them through each decision, each maneuver, explaining the philosophy that had kept her alive. You're not flying machines. You're flying against human beings who think, adapt, and make mistakes. Study their training, understand their doctrine, and you can beat them even when every tactical manual says you should lose. But more importantly, remember why you're up there. It's not about glory or proving you're the best. It's about completing the mission when others depend on you. Harris, now transferred to her squadron as her permanent co-pilot, stood at the back of the room and smiled. The Red Wolf had returned from exile, and she had brought home something more valuable than any victory, the understanding that honor wasn't found in perfection, but in refusing to quit when failure seemed certain. 6 weeks into her return to the 64th Aggressor Squadron, Maya received an unexpected visitor during her office hours. Captain Derek Ashton walked through her door, his gait still slightly uneven from the ejection injury that had ended his fighter career 6 years ago. Maya rose from her desk, her stomach knotting with guilt and old shame. Ashton was the student she had pushed too hard, the pilot whose career she had destroyed in her arrogance. He looked older, carrying weight around his middle that came from years of desk jobs instead of flight physicals. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "Derek, I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. What I did to you was unforgivable, and I've carried that guilt every day since." Ashton studied her with an expression she couldn't read, then slowly extended his hand. "Maya, I came here to tell you something I should have said 6 years ago. Thank you." Maya stared at his outstretched hand in confusion. Not understanding how the man whose career she had ruined could possibly thank her, Ashton's smile was sad but genuine. "That training flight, you pushed me into a scenario I couldn't handle. And when I froze, you pushed harder, trying to force me to break through. I punched out instead of recovering, and everyone blamed you for being too aggressive." He sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "But here's what I never told the Board of Inquiry. I already knew I wasn't cut out to be a fighter pilot. I loved the idea of it, loved the status and the romance, but I didn't have the instinct for combat flying. You exposed that truth in training, instead of letting me discover it in actual combat, where other people would have died because of my limitations." Maya sat down slowly, processing words that contradicted 6 years of self-recrimination. Ashton continued, his voice carrying hard-won wisdom. "After I left active flying, the Air Force put me in operations planning. Turns out I'm brilliant at logistics and tactical coordination. Things that bored me when I was chasing the fighter pilot dream. I'm a lieutenant colonel now, running mission planning for Pacific Air Forces. And I'm actually good at what I do. If you hadn't pushed me to my breaking point, I would have stayed in fighters until I got someone killed, then washed out in disgrace, instead of transitioning to where I actually belonged." He leaned forward with intensity. "When I saw the footage of your engagement over the South China Sea, I realized something. You knew 6 years ago what I know now, that not everyone is meant for combat flying, and there's no shame in that. You were trying to save my life by breaking me in training. I never thanked you for that, and I'm sorry the Air Force punished you for being right." Maya felt tears threatening for the first time since David's funeral, the weight of 6 years of guilt finally lifting from her shoulders. She'd been wrong about the way she handled Ashton, too aggressive and too prideful. But maybe the outcome had been right, even if her methods were flawed. "Derek, I was arrogant and I pushed too hard. Even if the result worked out, I should have been more careful with your career and your confidence." Ashton shook his head firmly. "You were doing what great instructors do, demanding excellence and refusing to pass students who weren't ready for combat. The Air Force needs more instructors like you, not fewer. Which is why I'm here officially. I'm the operations officer who approved your return to the 64th. Your reputation for being hard on students isn't a liability. It's exactly what we need to keep pilots alive in an increasingly dangerous world. Welcome home, Captain Torres. The fighter community is better with you in it." That evening, Maya stood alone on the flight line at Nellis, watching the sun set behind the mountains that framed the base where she had first learned to be a warrior. In her hand, she held David's pararescue badge, its motto that others may live catching the amber light. She had spent 6 years running from one mistake, convinced that she had failed the Air Force's trust, but the truth was more complex. She had failed in method while succeeding in outcome, had been broken by a system that couldn't distinguish between necessary hardness and destructive arrogance. The South China Sea had taught her that redemption wasn't about erasing your failures. It was about standing up when others needed you, regardless of whether you felt worthy. She pinned David's badge inside her flight jacket next to her heart, A reminder that service meant sacrifice and that honor was measured not in perfection, but in the willingness to fight when the stakes were highest. Tomorrow, she would return to the classroom, teaching the next generation of fighter pilots how to survive. Tonight, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in 6 years, pride in who she was and what she had become. The Red Wolf was home.
ওই বিশাল বিশাল হাট তুই থাকলে জমজমা